She was having dinner alone on her birthday. Then a stranger sat down and whispered this. The wind scraped down Main Street like it was trying to erase the day itself. Rain tapped against the windshield of the rideshare like a metronome for disappointment. Natalie Harper, 33, stared blankly at the gray blur outside her window, hugging her coat tighter. It was her birthday, and she was spending it alone. There was no cake, no streamers, no one waiting on the other end of a table to toast to her or ask about her wishes. 6 months ago, she had packed up her life in Portland and moved across the country to Wilmington, North Carolina for a career opportunity, a senior position she'd worked toward for nearly a decade. It was everything she thought she wanted. But on nights like this, when no one texted happy birthday and the silence was loud enough to rattle her confidence, Natalie felt like she had lost more than she'd gained. Her mother had called earlier, chipper and hopeful, asking, "So what are you doing tonight, sweetie? Big celebration?" Natalie lied, as she had rehearsed. "Oh yeah, the office planned a little dinner thing. Should be fun." She didn't want her mother to know that her only plan was to sit in a restaurant she couldn't really afford, alone, pretending she was fine. The driver interrupted her spiral. "That's the place up ahead, right?" Natalie nodded, pulling her umbrella from her tote. But just as the car turned toward the curb, a loud pop cracked through the air. Flat tire. "You've got to be kidding me," the driver muttered, pulling over. Natalie looked at the rain, then at her suede heels. "Don't worry, I'll walk." It was a short trek, but enough to drench her hem and unravel the curls she'd worked on for half an hour. Her makeup, subtle and soft, began to betray her effort. Inside the restaurant, warmth and golden light spilled across polished wood floors and clinking glasses. Couples leaned in close across candlelit tables. A family of 5 sang over a dessert platter. Natalie felt like an extra in someone else's life. She approached the host stand with a fragile smile. "I have a reservation under Natalie Harper." The young hostess scanned the screen, then hesitated. I don't see you here. I called yesterday. I spoke to Jason." "Oh, Jason doesn't work here anymore," the hostess said flatly. "I can put you on the wait list, though. Might be about 30 minutes. Natalie's throat tightened. "Okay," she whispered. The hostess's next question landed like a punch. "Will it just be you?" "Yes." The girl's mouth curved into something between pity and protocol. "All right, you can wait at the bar." 30 minutes and a watery $16 martini later, Natalie was seated at a cramped two-top near the kitchen. Every time the door swung open, she caught a glimpse of fluorescent lighting and heard the bark of line cooks. She ordered a wild mushroom pasta with a glass of Pinot. When the server returned, it was chicken piccata. She tried to be kind, pointing out the mistake. The waiter sighed like she was a burden. When the correct plate finally arrived, she stared at it. Steam spiraled upward. She was starving, but somehow fell hollow. As if this wasn't just a disappointing night, but a confirmation of everything she'd feared since the move, that she didn't belong, that she was easy to forget. She picked up her fork, then froze. A man had just slid into the seat across from her. "Just go with it," he said in a low voice, flashing a quick, conspiratorial grin. "Or I'm going to get sucked into dinner with my boss and his very chatty wife. And I don't think I can survive another story about her cat's acupuncture treatments." Natalie blinked. "Excuse me. Please," he whispered urgently. "Just 1 minute. You're saving a man's life here." It was absurd. It was intrusive. It was weirdly hilarious. She glanced over his shoulder. Sure enough, a table of 5 was filled with loud laughter and forced smiles. One man, bald, blue tie, booming laugh, caught eyes with the stranger and waved enthusiastically. "Okay," she muttered, fork still hovering. "You got 60 seconds." And with that, her birthday, and her life, took a turn she never saw coming. "My name's Jack," he said with a casual ease, like they were old friends who had done this a dozen times before. He unfolded the napkin and laid it across his lap, glancing over his shoulder one more time, toward the boisterous table. "And you, my heroic savior of the evening, are—" "Natalie," she replied cautiously, still gripping her fork midair, unsure whether to laugh or call the manager. "Well, Natalie," Jack said with a grin, "you just saved me from a social black hole. You have no idea what that man can do to a dinner conversation. Last year, he told the story of how he installed a ceiling fan. Twice." Natalie raised an eyebrow, her lips twitching in the beginnings of a smile. Ceiling fan, huh? Riveting. Jack leaned in and whispered with mock gravity, and he had diagrams. Against her better judgment, Natalie chuckled. The man was quick, charming, and clearly a little reckless, but not in a threatening way. He had this wide-eyed enthusiasm that felt disarming, like he was still amused by the ridiculousness of life and expected you to be, too. Still, a part of her was on guard. She glanced down at her plate, then back at him. So what's your plan here? Just hide out with random women until the coast is clear. He shrugged. Desperate times. I saw you sitting alone and thought, maybe you'd appreciate a little rescue too. Natalie's amusement dimmed for a moment. You figured I looked pathetic enough to be your cover. His face softened instantly. No, God, no. That came out wrong. He ran a hand through his dark, rain-dampened hair. I just meant, you look like you didn't want to be here either. I took a shot. Badly. Natalie relaxed slightly. His flustered honesty rang true. And oddly enough, there was something comforting in his awkwardness. This wasn't a guy running game. He seemed genuinely human. Flawed. Like her. A waiter approached, clearly confused. Sir, were you? Jack smiled and cut in smoothly. Actually, I'll be joining her. Just bring me what she's having. The waiter raised an eyebrow, but nodded and left. Natalie stared at Jack. You really don't give up, do you? He grinned. Only on things that don't matter. I think this matters. They sat in a strange, quiet pocket of stillness between kitchen chaos and the clinking hum of the rest of the restaurant. Somewhere in the background, a jazz piano cover of Coldplay filled the room, as odd and fitting as their situation. Then, just as Natalie was beginning to believe that maybe this wasn't the worst idea ever, the waiter returned. Miss Harper, he asked, holding a small plate with a chocolate mousse and a glowing candle flickering gently atop it. Compliments of the house. We heard it's your birthday. Natalie froze. Her cheeks flushed. She had noted it on the reservation, hoping the restaurant might offer a small gesture, a candle, a cookie, anything to make the day feel less empty. But now, with a stranger sitting across from her, it felt exposed. Jack's eyebrows shot up. Wait, it's your birthday. Natalie tried to downplay it. Yeah, just try not to make a thing out of it. But Jack wasn't having it. Oh no, no way. This changes everything. He snapped his fingers and gestured for the waiter again. 2 glasses of champagne. Your best bottle by the glass. Natalie blinked. Jack, that's really not. He waved her off. Natalie, you are not spending your birthday sipping wine alone near the kitchen while I pretend you're my cover story. This is now a celebration. She laughed, genuinely this time, despite herself. There was something undeniably bold and joyful in the way Jack carried himself, like he refused to let the world be dull for too long. When the champagne arrived, Jack lifted his glass to Natalie Harper, who agreed to save a stranger for the price of her own peace and pasta. May this year bring you something unexpected and something wildly overdue. They clinked glasses. The candle flickered between them, and for the first time in weeks, Natalie didn't feel like a stranger in her own life. She felt seen. Outside, the rain had stopped, but something else had started. The clatter of cutlery and the low murmur of conversations buzzed around them, but Natalie barely noticed. For the first time in what felt like ages, she was locked into a conversation that wasn't forced, filtered, or fenced in by office politics or polite small talk. Jack talked with the kind of open-hearted energy that made you lean in without realizing it. He had a natural rhythm, half storyteller, half comedian. One moment, he was describing a disastrous backpacking trip through Arizona where he mistook poison ivy for salad greens, and the next, he was mimicking the guttural tone of a retired Navy SEAL who once tried to recruit him at a gas station. Natalie laughed, so hard she nearly choked on a sip of champagne. You're serious? She gasped between giggles. Dead serious. The man had a falcon on his shoulder. Said it was his emotional support animal. No, I swear. His name was Carl. The falcon, not the seal. I didn't get the seal's name. I was too focused on not getting pecked. They both dissolved into laughter again. What amazed Natalie wasn't just Jack's stories. It was how easy it was to be herself around him. No pretending. No armor. No sense that she had to be on. He didn't know her as the new manager at Fenwick and Locke or the woman who froze up during last quarter's budget meeting. He just saw her. and listen like what she had to say mattered. In return, she found herself loosening the mental locks she usually kept tightly secured. "So," he asked after a moment of quiet, "what brought you to Wilmington?" Natalie hesitated, sipping her champagne, then said, "A job. Promotion, actually. I used to work in Portland, a satellite office. They moved me here to oversee the eastern region." "Impressive." She gave a small shrug. "It should be." It felt like a big win. But her voice trailed off. Jack leaned in gently. "But," she looked down at her plate, "I'm not sure I was ready. People look at me like I'm a charity case or a mistake." One guy literally said, well, muttered, "I wonder who she slept with to get that position. Like I couldn't possibly have earned it." Jack's smile faded, replaced with something sharper. "What a load of garbage." She blinked. "Seriously, that's just weak people projecting their insecurities because you have what they don't. It's easier for them to tear someone down than do the work to rise up themselves." Natalie felt her throat tighten, not with sadness this time, but something closer to recognition. "I didn't expect you to say that." "Why? Because I sat down at your table uninvited?" "Because you're—" She hesitated, searching for the word. Jack grinned. "Ridiculously charming." She rolled her eyes but smiled. "That's debatable." He feigned offense. "I've told you my Falcon story and everything." She laughed again, grateful for the lightness. And just like that, the conversation flowed once more. She told him about her awkward apartment building, where an elderly man 2 floors down once slipped a noise complaint under her door because her blender was too aggressive. She reenacted the moment with dramatic flair, holding up her fork as if it were the note, and lowering her voice in mock solemnity. "Dear tenant, this is a respectful community. Your smoothies are not." Jack nearly fell out of his chair laughing. And when the chocolate mousse finally arrived, along with a second round of champagne, they shared it, talking over each other, interrupting with new stories, diving into tangents about childhood pets, bad tattoos, and how no one really understands taxes. The hours melted. They didn't even realize they were the last ones left until a server subtly dimmed the lights and began stacking chairs. Jack raised his hand in mock surrender. "I think that's our cue." Natalie looked around in surprise. She hadn't checked the time once. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the sidewalk gleamed under the amber streetlights. There was something tender about the silence between them now, like the space had shifted from playful to something deeper, more fragile. Jack offered to call a car, but Natalie shook her head. "I'll walk. It's not far." He walked with her anyway. As they reached her street corner, she stopped, suddenly unsure of how to end this strange, perfect evening. "Well," she began. Jack stuffed his hands in his coat pockets and looked down at her. "Happy birthday, Natalie." She smiled. "Thanks for crashing my table." He tilted his head, a grin playing on his lips. "Anytime." Then, with a hesitant pause, he added, "Tomorrow's Saturday. Let me take you somewhere. A place you've never seen. Consider it an extended celebration." Natalie blinked. "Is this the part where I say yes and get serial murdered in a minivan?" Jack laughed. "No minivans. I swear. I drive a rusted old Jeep with more personality than horsepower." She hesitated. Normally, she'd say no. She was cautious. Always had been. But tonight it felt different. Jack had been different. "All right," she said softly. "One more day of birthday magic." Jack's face lit up like a kid on Christmas. "Perfect. I'll pick you up at 9. And I'm bringing coffee, no arguments." And just like that, he disappeared into the night. Natalie stood there for a moment, alone again, but no longer lonely. Something had shifted, and she couldn't wait to find out where it might lead. The next morning arrived with a golden wash of sunlight pouring through Natalie's half-closed blinds. She sat up slowly, blinking at the clock. 8:46 a.m. Her head wasn't aching, but her heart was doing something unusual, fluttering. Her thoughts tumbled around questions she couldn't quite answer. What exactly had last night been? A chance encounter? A fluke? A start of something? She threw off the covers, half laughing to herself. "What am I doing?" she whispered. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hey, it's Jack. I'm out front with coffee and something that resembles breakfast. If you don't come down in 5 minutes, your neighbor with the garden gnome collection is going to call the cops. He's watching me through the blinds like I'm a porch pirate." Natalie burst out laughing, tension breaking like steam off a kettle. "I'm coming." She slipped into a pair of jeans and a sweater, tossed her hair into a loose bun, and flew out the door. Outside, Jack stood leaning against an old, dented forest green Jeep with a cracked taillight and a bouquet of wildflowers sticking out of a coffee cup in the cup holder. He was holding 2 steaming cups and a paper bag that smelled like cinnamon. "You weren't kidding about the car," she said as she approached. He grinned. "She's a classic. Name's Beverly. Don't judge her by her bumper stickers. I break for raccoons and legalize composting," she read aloud with a smirk. "I'm a man of culture." They drove out of the city, past strip malls and subdivisions, until the concrete turned to gravel and the horizon stretched wide. Jack didn't tell her where they were going. Instead, he asked questions that made her think about her first pet, her favorite books, the weirdest job she'd ever had. In return, he told her about the time he worked at a lighthouse museum and had to dress up like a 19th century sea captain for a full summer. "I had a beard glued to my face with spirit gum for 93 days. I still wake up in cold sweats." 20 minutes later, they pulled up beside what looked like an abandoned stone gate choked with ivy. "Where are we?" Natalie asked, peering through the overgrowth. Jack grabbed a worn canvas backpack from back seat. "Come on, just trust me." He led her along a narrow dirt path that wound between old oaks and brambles. Birds chirped overhead, and the air smelled like wet leaves and wild sage. Natalie stepped carefully, unsure whether this was going to end with a view or a horror movie twist. But then, after turning a bend, they stepped into a clearing. Natalie gasped. Before them lay what could only be described as a secret garden, a hidden Eden tucked away behind moss-covered stone walls. Flowering vines spilled from crumbling archways. Wild roses bloomed alongside foxglove and lavender. A broken marble fountain trickled quietly in the center, its bowl filled with rainwater and floating petals. Weathered benches circled the space like ghosts from another era. "What is this place?" she whispered, turning slowly, eyes wide. Jack dropped the bag and pulled out a blanket. "Found it during a project a couple years ago. It was part of an old estate that was never fully developed. The mansion's gone, but this garden, somehow, remained untouched." He spread out the blanket under a sycamore tree and motioned for her to sit. Then, from the bag, he produced 2 buttery croissants, strawberries, and a jar of honey. "This is unreal," she murmured. "I know," Jack said, handing her a croissant. "I come here when I need to remember that beautiful things still exist, even when no one's watching." They ate in peaceful silence, sunlight dappling the ground through a cathedral of branches overhead. Natalie felt something warm and unfamiliar blooming in her chest. A quiet joy, a stillness. She hadn't felt that in a long time. "Thank you," she said suddenly, the words thick with more than politeness. "I didn't realize how much I needed this." Jack looked at her, then away, then back again. Most people think it takes a grand event to change their life. A promotion, a big move, something flashy. But sometimes it's just a new morning and someone sitting beside you. They sat there for hours, watching the breeze ruffle the petals, trading stories and dreams. Jack talked about his work restoring urban green spaces, about wanting to create corners of beauty in concrete cities. Natalie talked about how she used to think achievement meant being alone at the top, but how now it just felt lonely. As the afternoon waned, Natalie leaned back and stared up at the canopy of trees. She felt different, lighter, like a weight she'd carried so long it started to lift, and she hadn't even noticed she was carrying it. In that hidden garden, something began to shift, not just in the day, not just between her and Jack, but within her. Sunday arrived quietly, without fanfare or expectation, but with a strange sense of anticipation lingering in the air. Natalie couldn't explain it, but when she opened her eyes that morning, the weight in her chest that had been sitting there for months was softer. Not gone, but lighter, like it had been aired out. Jack had texted her a simple message. "Up for round 2 of garden therapy? Bring your favorite coffee this time. I trust you now." They met back at the garden, this time without any of the nervous energy from the day before. Natalie felt strangely at home as they pushed past the ivy-covered gate. The scent of fresh earth and blooming jasmine enveloped them like a welcome. Jack had brought a small radio. Soft acoustic music played in the background as he unpacked paints, sketchbooks, and a small toolkit. "You're an artist too?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "Not exactly, but I like fixing things," he said, lifting a broken bench plank. "Beauty doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes it just needs a little attention." Natalie watched him work for a while, then wandered deeper into the garden. Children's laughter echoed from beyond the trees, somewhere in the distance, probably a park. She followed the winding path and sat at the edge of a stone fountain, trailing her fingers through the water. For the first time in weeks, she let herself stop thinking about emails, deadlines, or performance reviews. She simply breathed. When Jack rejoined her, wiping his hands on a rag, they sat in easy silence, sharing a bag of trail mixed like a couple of old friends on a road trip. Then he asked a question that caught her off guard. "Were you really going to ask for a transfer back to Portland?" Natalie hesitated. "I was close. Friday morning. Actually, I had the form open on my screen. I didn't even know why I was hesitating. It just felt like I was trying to hold on to something, but I wasn't sure what." Jack nodded, thoughtful. "And now?" She looked around, the vines rustling in the breeze, the light filtering through tree branches like golden lace. "Now, I'm not sure about anything, but I don't feel like running away anymore." Jack smiled. "Good. I think running's overrated." That afternoon, Natalie told him about her first few months in Wilmington, how every hallway conversation at work felt coded, how she heard whispers about her being too young for the position or just a transfer hire. She told him about the happy hours she wasn't invited to, the meetings where her ideas were noted but never credited. And then she told him something she hadn't told anyone, not even her mother. "I've never felt so invisible in my life. I thought success would feel like a spotlight, but it feels more like shadows." Jack didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer cliches or assurances. He just nodded, absorbing every word. "Maybe," he said gently, "you were never supposed to chase their spotlight. Maybe you're meant to build your own." Something inside her cracked open at that. They spent the rest of the day fixing another bench, reading aloud from an old poetry book Jack found tucked behind a rose bush, and watching the sun begin to dip below the canopy. At one point, Jack dozed off with his head tilted back against the tree trunk, mouth slightly open. Natalie watched him for a long time, marveling at how a total stranger had become the safest place she'd known in months. By the time they packed up and headed back to the city, she felt it, that strange but unmistakable feeling of return, not to Portland or a former version of herself, but to something deeper, a quiet, powerful sense of self that she thought she had lost along the way. That night, as she stood in her small kitchen, reheating leftover soup and listening to the city hum outside her window, Natalie smiled at her reflection in the microwave door. Jack had been right. Sometimes a broken bench just needs a little attention. And sometimes, so do we. The next few weeks unfolded like a story Natalie never thought she'd be part of. It wasn't dramatic or loud. There were no fireworks or grand confessions. But in the quiet details of everyday life, something extraordinary was happening. Jack was becoming a fixture, not just in her weekends, but in her thoughts. Every Saturday, they'd find a new corner of the city to explore, a forgotten bookstore with handwritten recommendations stuck between the pages, an abandoned railway bridge where teenagers carved messages into the beams, or a roadside fruit stand run by a man who swore by muscadine grapes as the cure for all heartbreak. Jack introduced her to people who felt like they belonged to another world entirely. His friends were teachers, muralists, small-town journalists, a violinist who played at sunrise by the Riverwalk. They didn't care about resumes or networking or where you sat in a boardroom. They asked real questions, laughed with their whole bodies, and invited Natalie in without hesitation. At first, she felt like a tourist in this strange new tribe. But slowly, she started to feel like she wasn't visiting anymore. She was staying. Work was still a battlefield some days. There were meetings where her ideas were still ignored, and passive-aggressive emails that made her question herself. But something had shifted in her. It started small. A new pitch she shared without second-guessing. A direct response to a colleague who tried to cut her off mid-sentence. A bold email to her regional VP, suggesting a different approach to client engagement. And it started working. Her ideas were clearer, her tone more confident. Colleagues who once whispered behind her back now lingered after meetings to ask for her input. The ones who had underestimated her were starting to recalibrate. Not because she'd changed to fit in, but because she had stopped trying to. One morning, as she stood at the elevator with her coffee in hand, the building's janitor, Mr. Rubin, gave her a nod and a smile. "You look different these days, Miss Harper," he said kindly. "Lighter. Like you dropped something heavy." Natalie chuckled. "Maybe I did." Even her apartment, once just four walls and a door she closed behind her, began to feel like home. She rearranged furniture, added plants, hung string lights on the balcony. Jack dropped off a framed sketch he made of the hidden garden, which now sat on her bookshelf like a quiet reminder of how far she'd come. And still, through all of this, there was Jack. They hadn't defined anything. There were no labels or pressure, but he showed up consistently, sometimes with takeout, sometimes just to sit on the floor and read next to her. He wasn't trying to rescue her. He was just there. One Thursday night, as they walked back from a late dinner at a taco truck, Natalie stopped under a street lamp, her heart thudding in her chest. "Hey," she said, turning to face him. Jack stopped, hands in his coat pockets. "Yeah." She hesitated, then said, "You know, before I met you, I was about to give up. Not on life, not dramatically, just on the idea that things could feel right again, that this place could ever feel like mine." Jack's face softened. "And now," she smiled, "I think maybe I just needed to find the right corner of it. And someone to remind me I'm not invisible." He didn't answer right away. He just stepped closer, took her hand gently, and said, "You were never invisible, Nat. You just forgot how brightly you shine." The rest of the walk home was quiet, but their hands stayed laced the whole way. Autumn crept into Wilmington like a secret. Cool mornings, longer shadows, the scent of firewood drifting through the air. Natalie began to mark the days not in deadlines or meetings, but in quiet rituals. Coffee on the balcony with the sunrise. Weekend strolls through farmers markets. Late-night calls with Jack, sometimes saying nothing at all, just sharing the silence. And for the first time in a long while, she felt whole. There was no single moment where she arrived. Her transformation didn't happen in a cinematic swell of music or some grand declaration of success. It happened in layers, a dozen subtle shifts that stacked quietly until one day, she looked around and realized she had built something new. At work, her confidence bloomed into leadership. She proposed a mentorship program for young hires, drawing from her own early experiences in the Portland office. When a senior executive tried to sideline her on a project, she didn't shrink back. She addressed it directly, respectfully, and with undeniable clarity. That afternoon, her inbox filled with quiet acknowledgments from team members. "Thank you for speaking up. You said what we've been thinking. We needed that." She wasn't just earning respect. She was inspiring it. Outside of work, her world had become wonderfully unpredictable. She was attending open mic nights with Jack and his friends, painting murals on community walls, even volunteering at a local urban garden. The version of Natalie who once measured her worth by job titles and performance metrics had loosened her grip. One night, after a particularly joyful evening spent roasting marshmallows over a beach bonfire, Jack turned to her with a look that held no pretense. "I think you've got roots here now," he said, brushing a grain of sand off her shoulder. Natalie looked up at the stars, considering. "I think I stopped waiting to belong and just started showing up like I already did." He nodded. "That's the secret, you know. Life doesn't invite you in. You got to walk through the door yourself." They sat in the glow of the fire, not needing to fill the air with anything more. Back at her apartment that night, Natalie stood in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush in hand, and caught her own reflection mid-thought. There was a softness in her face now. The lines of fatigue had faded. Her eyes, once dulled by self-doubt, held something steadier, presence. She turned off the lights and crawled into bed, her phone lighting up with a message from Jack. Today was a good day. She smiled and typed back. They all are now. It wasn't about Jack, or the city, or even the job. It was about her. Natalie Harper had stopped waiting for life to make room for her. She had built her own place in it. And finally, it felt like home. On a crisp Saturday morning, exactly 1 month after the night Jack sat her table uninvited, Natalie stood once again at the entrance to the secret garden. This time, she was alone. She had come early, without telling anyone. Just her, a thermos of coffee, and the changing leaves that had turned the garden into a tapestry of amber, gold, and crimson. The wind danced gently through the trees, carrying the scent of moss and dried petals. She walked slowly through the worn stone path, her boots crunching softly over fallen leaves. Every step brought back a memory, laughter on that broken bench, the warmth of Jack's shoulder beside hers, the way the sun filtered through the canopy that first day when everything began to shift. At the fountain, she sat, cross-legged, quiet. In her hands was a small notebook. Its cover was plain, but inside were scribbled reflections she'd started writing weeks ago, letters she never sent, thoughts she was finally learning to voice. She flipped to a blank page and wrote slowly. I used to believe life happened in milestones, jobs, cities, birthdays. But now I know life happens in moments, in detours, in quiet pauses that seem meaningless until they change everything. She paused, listening to the sound of water trickling over the edge of the fountain bowl. The wind tugged at the pages. The man who sat at my table that night, he didn't rescue me. He reminded me that I didn't need rescuing. I just needed a reason to remember who I was. She stopped again, blinking back sudden tears. Not sadness, something more tender. A kind of gratitude that nestled deep in the chest. From her bag, she pulled a small bundle, wildflowers she'd picked on the walk-in. She stood, stepped to the fountain's edge, and gently placed them in the water. They floated there, spinning slowly, catching sunlight like tiny lanterns. It wasn't a goodbye. It wasn't even closure. It was acknowledgement of change, of arrival. She turned and walked back toward the gate. But just as she reached it, she heard footsteps behind her. Natalie. She turned. Jack stood there, out of breath, holding a thermos identical to hers. I thought I might find you here, he said, sheepish, a little breathless. Brought backup coffee, just in case. Natalie smiled. Then you know me well. They stood there for a moment, under the canopy of turning leaves, in the place where everything had started. You okay? He asked. I'm more than okay, she said quietly. I'm ready. Jack nodded, stepping forward to take her hand. And together, without saying anything more, they walked back through the garden, not looking for magic anymore, because now they carried it with them. Sometimes we expect transformation to look like lightning, a sudden bolt, a flash of clarity, something loud and unmistakable. But most of the time, change arrives like a whisper. It happens when a stranger sits at your table, when a ruined evening becomes an unexpected beginning, when someone sees you, not your title, not your resume, not your polished smile, but the you underneath it all, the one who's been waiting to feel real again. Natalie's story wasn't about falling in love with a man. It was about falling back in love with life, with herself. It was about remembering that sometimes the worst days aren't endings at all, but quiet invitations to begin again. That connection doesn't always come with fanfare. It often walks in wearing a wrinkled jacket and carrying 2 cups of coffee. It's easy to feel lost in a world that moves too fast, values too little, and demands too much. But Natalie's journey reminds us that even on our loneliest days, we are never as invisible as we think. That healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in fragments, through laughter, through honesty, through finding your place not in the perfect moment, but in the real one. So if you're watching this, and you've had a day that feels like it's unraveling, pause, breathe, look around, because sometimes, just when we think no one sees us, someone does. And that changes everything.